Welcome and good afternoon, everyone. Virtually Somerville is being recorded. Virtually Somerville is the Chamber's Public Affairs series. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to continue at noon on Tuesday to feature a candidate for councilor at large. We'll begin with a brief intro of the candidate. The candidate will get an opportunity to deliver opening remarks, and then we'll do an audience candidate Q&A session. My name is Stephen Mackey. I'm the president of the chamber and today's moderator. When we get to Q&A, I will ask you to use the raise hand function on your Zoom connection. I will recognize hands, invite you to identify yourself, and ask your question. City Councilor Jake Wilson is a candidate for re-election. Jake was born in Minneapolis, St. Paul. I'm not sure which. He moved to a family farm in central Iowa when he was 2. The oldest of 4 children, he grew up playing sports and worked on the family farm. He studied at Penn. After graduation, he moved, I think it was then he moved to Boston, to Somerville. He was married and started a family. Jake has had 20 years of experiences in new media, internet startups, capital campaigns for landmark building projects, municipal government, and professional sports. He served as president of youth soccer and treasurer of the Friends of the Healy, treasurer and president of the Friends of the Healy School. In 2021, he won a seat on the city council. He lives in Winter Hill with his wife, their 2 children, and their dog, Lilu. Councilor, welcome to today's program, and please tell us something about yourself.
Well, thanks, Stephen. You pretty much said it all. Thanks to the chamber for doing this series. It's looking like it might be a low turnout election this year, so I'm just really appreciative whenever folks engage and take an interest in one of the few contests on the ballot this November. Like Stephen said, I'm Jake Wilson. I'm running for re-election as your city councilor at large. Currently in my first term on the council, and I'm really enjoying the work as an outgoing extrovert who really delights in problem solving, a role talking to people and trying to address issues in our community is just right up my alley. So I really love working for the people of Somerville, and I'm hopeful voters feel the same way about my service. I guess in addition to what Stephen said about me, yeah, my background is in journalism and communications and local nonprofit leadership. Some of you might have known me before my time on the council for my years leading Somerville Youth Soccer, a proud chamber member. My wife and I, as Stephen mentioned, have lived on Jake Street, Winter Hill for almost 20 years now. And I have 2 daughters in the SPS system at the Healy School. And that's where I got my start in community activism, organizing Healy families to get that amazing new schoolyard funded and built. They tell new counselors to pick a few areas to focus on if you're lucky enough to get elected. And it's always been tough for me to narrow my focus to just a handful of things. But when I'm not doing constituent services, I tend to devote most of my time to addressing our regional housing crisis, making our city's streets safer for everyone, improving communication, public information and civic engagement, and just working toward our goal of this being a city for everyone in terms of who has a voice and a seat at the table. I chair the finance committee, and I probably don't need to explain to all of you what that entails or how important that is. Just know that I spend a great deal of time on the roll, making sure that we're doing the crucial fiscal oversight that's our duty as the city council. And I look for ways to innovate as finance chair. For example, last year I introduced a new process where my colleagues and I came together to identify our top shared budget priorities and then communicated those to the mayor early on in the budget process. And then during the budget review process in June, I introduced the process for pre-submitting questions by city councilors, then answered by staff memos from the department division heads. And we've dramatically reduced the duration of those meetings during budget season. As Jack could tell you, those meetings can get very long. But I view that as saving people's time and saving taxpayer money. because clerks, for example, are being paid by the hour. So availability, transparency, accountability, these are all key goals of mine as a city councilor. I'm driven to increase the public's awareness of what's happening in Somerville. I average 2 email newsletters a month, covering news, issues, events around our city. I'm extremely online, as they say, maintaining active social media presences to get information out, engaging with constituents. And I hold recurring office hours on Sunday mornings and on demand for anyone who can't make those. And I do respond to my emails and return phone calls, as many of you can attest. Since 2001, I've owned an internet publishing business that's had paid employees, and my wife makes and sells handmade jewelry. So I understand the plight of small business. I always make the point that local small business really keeps money in the community. And unfortunately, it's been a very rough last few years for businesses, as you all know, between the pandemic and the resulting supply chain issues, the tight labor market, inflation this past year, and the displacement that we're seeing here in Somerville due to rising rents and the redevelopment. So whether it's championing local businesses on social media, in one recent case ending up in the crosshairs of a national firestorm involving Tucker Carlson, meeting with the owners of businesses threatened with displacement due to that redevelopment I mentioned, dropping by to talk to restaurant owners about new options for expanded late night hours, or just pushing to make it easier for new and established business owners to get licenses and permits they need with fewer headaches and confusion. I've worked to be a good friend to our local small businesses during my time on the council. So yeah, I'm running for re-election to get the honor of doing all this for another 2 years, and I'm honored to be with you here today, and I'm happy to answer questions about anything you might have on your minds.
Great, Councilor, thank you very much. We'll start with the chairman of the board, Adam Portney.
Jake, thanks for coming. I will follow up on the issues facing small businesses. I just one of the questions that comes up a lot with us is how the city council can weigh, climate and the need for bike lanes and a bike network against the needs of small businesses and their need to continue to have parking in front of their businesses. I think right now, as Amazons of the world and everything else are pushing down on small businesses and making it harder for them to survive, taking away even a parking spot in front of some of these places, when you talk to them, they come back and say that could be, the death knell. So how do you weigh that out in the city council? And to us, it just feels like we're not hearing that side of it.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I had a feeling bike lanes would come up today.
Go right out.
Things that Somervillians love to fight about, bike lanes might be the single biggest flashpoint, I'd say. I often lump this in with the culture wars that we see nationally, and that might be the best example we have, sort of a local culture war. I just try to strip away the emotion and push for really careful consideration and strong planning and execution to arrive at a good outcome. I'll point to the Highland Ave redesign project. Definitely the biggest battlefront happening here in Somerville, or not happening at the moment, to the great annoyance of many, as we have a 2-year pause on that, basically. My view on Highland Ave is that the city staff need to be sitting down with local business owners on Highland and getting a really precise picture of each business's actual parking needs. Counter service restaurants need short-term parking spots in front for food delivery vehicles or customers picking up orders. A sit-down restaurant generally needs 2-hour parking. A barbershop needs 1-hour parking. A hair salon doing cut and colors could need 4-hour parking. Then there are loading zones for the all-important deliveries to these businesses. So we really need to be gathering all this information and designing a parking strategy that improves the situation for businesses and their customers. You might think I sound delusional talking about improving a parking situation while removing parking, as is likely going to be the case on Highland. But, let's remember the vast majority of parking along Highland Ave is non-metered parking that has just a 2-hour limit for non-permit holders, and resident parking permit holders can basically store their vehicles there for multiple days. So my view is that space on Highland Ave is precious, and it most definitely is. We should be prioritizing active use and turning over parking every Monday through Saturday on that street. So we'd be improving bike and pedestrian infrastructure and improving the business parking situation. And I believe the situation for residents who drive to and from work regularly, the one group who I think would be losing out here would be the occasional drivers who've been using Highland Ave for long-term car storage. I think it's reasonable to ask folks who store their cars, there to do it on side streets and walk an extra block or two, just for the greater good. Since they're not using their cars regularly, I view it as the minimum aggregate pain for the greatest aggregate good. But yeah, I'm here for centering, the very real parking needs of businesses and their customers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen, am I supposed to be calling on people, or are you handling that?
I am
Okay.
calling on people, but I'm going to comment for a second. I appreciate Councilor Wilson's insight that he brings on the issue. I think it's the way to go. The thing, staying on Highland Ave, my residential neighborhood is Highland and there at those storefronts and other street level entrances. What you find is there's a great deal of women and minority owned business and operations, a great deal of women and minority workforce behind the counters. And they tend not to be involved in the Chamber of Commerce, but they are a very important part of the fabric of the city. And we'd like to ensure that we have find a way to have public hearings when it comes to addressing the questions that Councilor Wilson has raised. That it needs everybody at the table, the cyclists, the walkers, the drivers, and the people that work in those places, and the people that own those places, or the communities that are behind them. For example, churches that are on Highland Ave. So I don't want to take any more time. What I want to ask everybody is please use your raise hand function. If you have any difficulty with that, you can wave to me with your hand. So we'll go to the next question, Mr. Kane.
One of the pitfalls of being a co-host is that I can't raise my hand, so I have to jump up and down. I can ask you the stock question I'm asking everybody, Jake, and that is, so you've been a counselor for a while, you know the land of the lay of the land. What do you think the 2 or 3 big challenges for the next council are going to be? I mean, we're not getting a humongous turnover here. I mean, we may get one new at-large person and 1 or 2 new ward counselors, and so the same people are going to be there. And I'm wondering what do you think the challenges are going to be?
Other than navigating interpersonal conflicts? No, I'm joking. I would say, well, first of all, charter review, getting that over the line. I know that's I'm not just playing to my audience here with Pat. I know that's a big one to everyone. It's huge for us. As you all are hopefully aware, the City Council recently completed our lengthy process of amending the proposed charter that came out of the Charter Review Committee and the work they did on that, and we've sent that on to the mayor. The administration's now doing their thing with it, and at some point we're going to need to reconcile what they want and what the City Council wants. There are some key areas of disagreement, one of them being the length of the mayoral term. One thing I had proposed was a 4-year term, but with a recall provision with a high bar. We don't want to become California here. We don't want to become a circus. As I would say, the lack of challengers here 2 years into the mayor's term kind of points to the fact that these things tend to work in 4-year cycles anyway. And I see the case for a 4-year term for the mayor. And I would back that. That's just one example of the negotiation that's going to have to happen. The second thing I'll say broadly public safety issues. For example, body cams, police body cams. Funding was cut from the FY23 budget for the bonuses and equipment for those due to the lack of an acceptable policy in place. I know Councilor Ewan Campen submitted a proposed policy that was based on best practices elsewhere, but I know there's at least one fundamental disagreement with the Patrol Officers Association that's going to need some resolution. But I would love to see that move forward, and I'm doing some work behind the scenes on that. Also on the public safety front, the police department staffing operations study, it's back. It's with the Department of Racial and Social Justice. They're doing a whole community engagement process with it. But that's going to be really key to informing the staffing numbers for the police in the FY25 budget. And then similarly, alternative emergency response or unarmed civilian response, the council strongly supports this. We've heard from Director Melina Capers of Racial and Social Justice that it's a matter of if, not when. There are disagreements over the approach. Some want this AER embedded within the police department. Others want total separation of it. There's a disagreement of whether everything should be a co-response with a clinician and an officer versus a tailored response that looks at the nature of each call and decides whether to send just an officer, a co-response, or just a clinician. And then finally, civilian oversight. It's currently sitting with RSJ. They're doing a whole process around that as part of their Reimagining Public Safety initiative. I know folks feel like progress has been slow on this front since 2020. It has been over 3 years now since we started this conversation. And I'm hopeful we see some movement on that front. I'll just say this is one everyone seems to support just as good policy. And for a third, I'll say City Council support staff. We have a legislative and policy analyst, Brendan Salisbury. He's phenomenal. I've worked with him on ordinances and just general policy, and he's absolutely invaluable. Tricky part being, how does a body of 11 act as a supervisory role? The solution has been to move them out. Brendan has been his position moved out from under the city council to the city clerk's office. It's tough to have 11 bosses. But recently, I think just last week, a new position was posted, hiring a financial analyst for the city council. And this position would support the finance committee. And then the big thing is they could conduct research for counselors. Despite doing this full time, there are so many research projects on the finance side that I have either not been able to fully get done or just, or haven't even been able to start. I have a long list of these, and I shared it with our city clerk as she was looking into creating this position. So yeah, I guess those are the three things: charter review, public safety issues, and city council support staff.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Counselor. Again, I'm gonna invite hands. Anybody that would like to go next? Bill Shelton, welcome.
Thank you, sir. A couple of years ago, the chamber was gracious enough to host me in one of these conversations. And I made the argument that anything that we care about, we have to pay for. And in order to enable us to do that, we needed a great deal more commercial development. Since then, two things have happened. One is that we have, as a proportion of the total assessed value in the city, we actually have less commercial development than we did 2 years ago, despite all of the biotech development that people like to point to. In fact, unaffordable housing development has outpaced that. And secondly, Rich Raish tells us that every class of our infrastructure is at the end of its useful life. We get that sense when we drive down our streets and try and hold on to our fillings. But we also, that also includes city buildings. It includes stormwater and sanitary sewer, and includes water supply. So, Jake, how are we going to pay for that?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. This is one I like to tell people. We have three separate, I'm counting, 10-digit problems in the city infrastructure wise. We have, as Bill mentioned, our street surfaces, our sewer system, and our vertical infrastructure, our municipal buildings. You all seen the headlines around the Winter Hill School closing, just emblematic of the problems that we have there infrastructure wise with our buildings. You all drive on the streets around here. and you all see the sewer work that we're having to go back and do. The reality is, I won't point fingers at one administration. You know, this goes back decades. And to be honest, you know, Somerville hasn't always had the money that we have now. And we as a city have punted on infrastructure. And honestly, it's been in keeping with state and federal attitudes toward it too. It's a societal view. You know, yeah, we had phenomenal infrastructure at one point, and I guess we just decided that we didn't need to do anything about that for a long time, and now it's all fallen apart. So yeah, now we have to pay the piper, and it's unpleasant financially. It's unpleasant in terms of the disruption in the community, as anyone who's had to drive through Spring Hill could tell you. As anyone who, you know, lives next to a construction site could tell you, as Winter Hill families could tell you, having to go to the Edgerly School now. So yeah, paying for it is the big piece of it. We're lucky enough the city now got our first AAA bond rating, which allows us to borrow at cheaper rates. I'm excited to see us use that capacity now, the additional capacity that's going to give us. The commercial development that Bill mentioned, that is the big driver here that's helping our budget grow from I think it was 187 million a decade ago, and we topped out north of 330 this past year. So we're seeing dramatic expansion there. We need to see more of it. There are questions about what's in the pipeline. There are market forces here that are kind of hit. We're seeing a lot of brakes getting pumped on some commercial developments. For example, the Broadway break site in East Somerville originally was came out as a proposal for life science, and it just recently came back as housing. I know there are a lot of concerns about just the general market. I've been told we've built out 10 years of capacity in terms of life science now at this point. And yeah, I want to be clear, there's commercial development beyond life science. I was at the Summer Nova neighborhood meeting last night. That's a proposal that's for a lot of commercial development that is not life science. So yeah, the answer is, you know, we are at the mercy of market forces here. The pendulum, you know, initially it was all residential, and we had a real tough problem getting commercial development done here. Felt like we had to twist arms to get people interested in that, and it swung the other way, where then we had people yelling that we weren't building enough housing. And I'll be curious, you know, it seems to swing back and forth. If people have ideas about how we can incentivize the exact kind of development we want, I'm here for that. It's not fun just being at the whims of developers in terms of what they want to do in the city. So yeah, I'm here for conversations about ideas on the exact precise form of development we want to see here.
I think it is a great question, a tremendous avenue for discussion. I must comment that looking back on the history of the city, I wouldn't so much blame any administration or any council or board of aldermen or any group in the city that the dysfunction of the city was rooted, I would suggest, in the regions, in the state's abandonment of Somerville as an urban environment when it pushed transit service out to the suburbs and left Somerville with suburban life and suburban roads and rails, unlike Boston and Cambridge. So in the past generation, what we were trying to do is catch up in terms of reestablishing urban transit in the city, so that we could have 21st century commercial development, and that commercial development could feed the public treasury, the city treasury, municipal services of public works, public safety, and public education. So I think here we are in this generation, and it's a matter of the kind of dialogue that, Councilor, you were talking about, and the kind of input that you are suggesting in getting, I think, the business community more involved in the strategic conceptual thinking, because it's not going to be done, whatever the solution is, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a generation. And it needs to be a generation that has a new outlook on business. Business and economic development used to be seen as contrary to housing. It's integral to housing. The people that build the housing the most often need to be in on the discussion, in the dialogue, respecting all the time that the city councilors are the elected officials. They represent the 80,000, closing in on 90,000 people in Somerville, and they make the decision. But being open, like it seems you are, Councilor, that's where I think the chamber would suggest it needs to go. And in answer to Bill's question about where we're standing right at the moment. Jack Connolly, you have a question?
The concern I'm going to raise that I hear virtually every day, living here in Davis Square and talking to residents, talking to merchants, are twofold. Number one, the empty storefronts, as I mentioned earlier. We're going to see that in addition to Be Fresh closing the middle of next month, that we're going to see the Rosebud shut down temporarily while they reevaluate. The smoke shop's been vacant for well over a year. We've still got an empty storefront where Johnny D's used to be. There's a lot of concern about what is going to happen with those empty storefronts. And secondly, and Jake, maybe you can bring us up to speed. The city spent $40,000 hiring the Fenway Health Alliance to talk about where to put a potential substance control center, aka a drug injection facility in the city. They came back with, well, maybe one in the Davis Square area, one in East Somerville. That discussion seems to have died down, but nobody around Davis Square has forgotten that notion, especially on top of the mentions of the empty storefronts and the lack of daytime traffic in Davis Square. Where have you seen any discussion, if any, regarding a potential safe consumption facility? Is that still going on, or is that been backburned, like you mentioned Highland Ave has been?
Yeah, thanks, Jack. I appreciate those questions. I'll start with the first one. Davis in general, thank you for calling attention to the plight of Davis. I know how much you've done personally for Davis Square over the decades, so I can only imagine how it feels for you to see what's happening to Davis. Davis Square is definitely going through a rough patch between, like you mentioned, the closures of businesses, vacant storefronts, the growing number of unhoused folks here in the wake of that first clear out for Mass and Cass in Boston. Infrastructure that's falling apart. Davis Square needs some love. To me, I do wonder if it's a case of the transform areas on the eastern side of the city getting most of the planning attention and funding love here as we've looked to transform that part of the city. But yeah, Davis definitely is. It has its struggles right now. I would say we need to finalize Davis Square commercial area plan. We've had that draft version for years now. That the delay that both of us mentioned here about the Highland Ave redesign project, that's negatively impacting Davis Square because we're waiting to find out what's going to happen with the last 2 blocks of Highland Ave there in Davis Square. It's holding up some key decisions in the square, like for example, potential pedestrianization, easy for me to say, of Elm Street, because you can't do that unless Highland Ave is 2 ways there. So that's the sort of thing that we need to see some movement on that front. In any case, there are things we can and should be doing now, like fixing the ridiculous sidewalk situation there. I've personally been involved in the debate over the materials for the sidewalk. I've talked to folks with Davis Now who favor a restoration of the brick sidewalks using modern materials and methods that won't degrade or cause accessibility problems. I've also then spoken to members of the Somerville Commission for Persons with Disabilities who do have concerns about sticking with brick sidewalks there. What I proposed was a site visit within the Metro Boston area to a place where that modern approach has been in place the longest, so folks can see with their own eyes and experience firsthand whether this does in fact hold up over time or whether we need to look at more conventional sidewalk materials in Davis. As far as the second question was about overdose prevention center. it's like everything I'm hearing is it's likely to be in Davis Square and likely to be a modular approach, not a mobile approach. Modular meaning a trailer. Everything points to it likely being a parking lot somewhere there, and I think you'll see some movement on that here, reasonably soon. I'm not saying next month, but I would expect it to be, maybe within the next 6 months. Probably a community process around selection of a site, perhaps. I know there's anxiety in some quarters of the city about overdose prevention centers, and I use that term very intentionally because these OPCs are much more than just a site for consumption. The work that's gone into these has ensured that there will be wraparound services that are needed to make these truly effective. 2 years ago, while knocking doors, I'd get into conversations with folks who express concerns, like as Jack mentioned about, opening an overdose prevention center here. I get it. It seems, you're talking about, creating a safe spot for folks to use illicit substances. I get why that would be jarring for people. But I got a lot out of those conversations with people. I listened to concerns, and then just maybe tried to make some points to them that maybe they hadn't considered. The reality is we've been trying the same approach for decades, and the opioid epidemic just keeps getting worse. We cannot keep doing the same thing and expecting different results. We lose between 15 and 20 Somervillians each year to overdose, and that's tragic. And nobody denies that an overdose prevention center will save lives in year one that it's open. It's just an absolute fact. So the goal here is to keep folks alive until that day they're ready to accept help. And maybe it's not today, maybe it's not tomorrow, but the belief is that eventually that will be the day for them. And then we'll have those wraparound services there on hand, ready to get them the help that they need to just, I guess, mark a new, better chapter in their lives. And I understand concerns that folks have about the so-called honeypot effect that would, potentially draw people into the area if an OPC opened here in Somerville. I've been assured by neighboring municipalities, plural, that they're ready to follow suit and open their own OPCs once we do. I wish it weren't another case of Somerville leads the way, but that's where we are. So yes, as with, I think, every elected official in Somerville, I do support overdose prevention centers. I'm more than happy to talk to folks with anxieties, concerns, questions about it. I know how productive these conversations can be, and honestly, I really relish them.
Just as a quick follow-up, if I can jump on real quickly, it is a major concern here in Davis Square, and that there are a number of people who are just very concerned because there's been no dialogue. There's been no opportunities for people to speak their voices. Mayor Brune, who spent a lot of time back in the 80s and 90s when we transformed Davis Square with the building of the Harvard Vanguard, saving the Somerville Theater, building the Citizens Bank building, and essentially revitalizing the square, all because of the Davis Square Task Force, where people, residents, businesses, community folks met regularly to discuss location of businesses, services, etc. It isn't happening now, and that's the dilemma that right now we face with all this technology. Nobody seems to want to get together and discuss these type of things. Location, location, location. Jake, you just mentioned it. Someone wants to talk about putting in a parking lot in Davis Square close to residential homes with families. Is that something worth discussing with neighborhoods? I think it is, and I'm willing to bet that hundreds of people in Davis Square would love that opportunity. So I hope that's something that you'll champion, because there's a lot of us in Davis Square who realize people need help. There's a lot of homeless folks who are finding their way around the square. And as a result, some of them have mental health issues, some have drug issues. Let's find some of that help. How come we're not doing it on a regionalized basis, working with Cambridge and Boston? We got Mass General Brigham with 5,000 people in East Somerville. The basement of their parking garage might not be a good place to do something like this. I'm kind of surprised.
Jack, it's a major topic.
That's right. Let's raise it.
Do a program simply about that.
You should.
And simply about new developments in the past, especially over the past year. both
Steve, can
with-
I just say, I totally agree with Jack about a public process there. It's going to be important. I think it works, can be a two-way bit of communication as well, right? A chance for folks to share their concerns, share where they're at on it. It can also be a chance for folks behind the project to share information and possibly, like, I've seen it myself, like when you share the reality of what's being proposed, the anxiety level does go down. It's a very real thing.
Thank you, Counselor. I'm looking for hearing from another section, another industry, another business district. Do I see any raised hands? You can use the raise hand function or just wave.
I guess we covered it all.
You nailed everything, Counselor. I've never seen them so quiet. Come on, or I'll pick you out or put you on the spot. Mr. Kane.
Since I always try being the troublemaker, you may not, you may confuse the, we're being quiet as opposed to we've given up. Because a lot of the stuff that happens in the city just seems to kind of happen. I mean, and you sit here and say Highland Ave is falling apart, and, you know, city needs paint. None of that stuff came up in the budget stuff. Nothing, you know, magically it shows up. We talk about the schools falling apart, and everybody's like, yeah, it's not like the administration or the council is going to do anything. And so I think one of the challenges, and I used it, I think, in the last set of these we did, which was there was this fantastic hawk signal put in front of a Stop and Shop that, or in front of Star Market that Adam loves. And the city council probably 4 times told the administration to get rid of it. And the administration kind of went, yeah, screw yourself. And so it's the reason I asked my questions earlier that said, so what are the big challenges? Because the city council seems to do lots of, hey, let's support the Starbucks striking employees in Portland, Oregon. It's like, that's exciting. But what are we doing actually for the city to get the people that unfortunately have to live here to actually think that they want to stick around?
Thanks,
I suppose
Pat.
I make that into a question, but
It's okay. I can riff on that. I do want to point out that the Highland Ave question did come up during budget hearings. Councilor Campen actually made a pretty big stink about it. He doesn't get angry that often. If you want to see footage of Councilor Campen angry, go check it out. I don't remember the exact date. It was whenever I think engineering and mobility appeared before the finance committee. Councilor Campen made his strong feelings well known on the fact that was essentially left out of the budget, the funds for the Highland Ave redesign project. Yeah, no, I hear you. Sometimes it feels like we are shouting into a void sometimes. We do have some clear powers that are spelled out in our current very flawed charter. It does spell out our powers, right? We have powers of financial oversight. We have power over zoning. We control, we confirm appointments, and we write ordinances. And even with ordinances, though, for example, and I've experienced this myself with one I'm working on right now, if we don't have the support from the executive, from the administration, and then from city staff, there's no guarantee that ordinance is actually going to be enforced. And it is a very frequent source of frustration on the city council. We as Pat knows, we've talked about this a lot. We're in our strong mayor system, and I'd say we're in a very strong mayoral system here in Somerville. We're boxed in as a city council sometimes. And so that's been one of the challenges for me as a counselor. I came from running an organization where we made, sweeping transformative change in a very, very short amount of time. And I knew it would be a challenge for me, the frustration of being one of 11 legislators in a body with, very limited power in some areas. But yeah, you have to get creative, and you have to, for me, then it comes down to getting the administration and city staff on side. with what you want to push for policy wise. You know, you can't just go rogue and do something and expect that it's going to go swimmingly. So yeah, I mean, but then again, I'm here for collaboration. You know, I have 10 colleagues. I strive to have a very good personal relationship with each of them. I've co-sponsored items with each of them here in this term, and I work with the administration. I work with our legislative and policy analysts on stuff to try to break through that and find common ground and try to do good stuff here in our city.
I was hoping now a whole bunch of other people would jump up with, oh my God, they have questions.
Yeah, there you go. Thank
Hey,
you,
want to talk
Pat.
about
Thank you,
housing?
Counselor.
Oh, here we go. Now some questions. All right.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Counselor. Adam?
Sure, I think that, you know, Jake, you and I have talked offline also, so I'll be honest about the unintended consequences of a lot of the things that have been put into place. So, for example, we are still one of the most densely populated cities in America, and certainly the most densely populated city in New England. So when we're looking at that and we're saying we need housing, we need housing, we need housing, and I was at that Summer Nova event last night as well, we're in an area that was not used for housing, is a clear area that should be used for commercial growth. And all I heard between the snappy fingers was, let's turn this into more housing. In addition to that, the only way that you can do housing is if you don't create as large an affordable component to it, aside from the Star Market site and all that stuff. And I know there's ways to do it. But housing is a regional issue, and it's a national and a state-run program for the most part. So I guess, how do we focus and incentivize the commercial base to move in, build, and occupy Somerville so that we can actually take that tax money to build the roads, to build the schools, to build the infrastructure, and to actually help the housing? Because as Bill has said, for generations, this is the way to fix the problem. You can't just say to every developer that comes in the city, I'll give you the building if you give me a park, a community center, and a building to house 100 people or 100 units. That doesn't work. The numbers don't work, they won't come. So I guess the question here is, how do we incentivize more commercial growth in Somerville?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I was at that Summer Nova meeting as well last night, and I heard those. You know, and we hear all the time. You know, we get the city council gets a lot. We get yelled at a lot. You know, when a new big residential thing goes up, we get yelled at. This should have been commercial. When a new commercial thing comes up, we get yelled at. This should have been residential. Yeah, and to me, so for example, last night, there was a lot. Sort of a, I don't know, pushback. It was pointed out just how much this project would contribute in linkage fees and other benefits, but basically money that would go into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And there were people for whom that was not enough, right? They wanted actual. They said, well, we want actual housing building. And I believe Councilor Scott then, who was hosting the meeting as the ward councilor, pointed out, well, you know, these funds actually allow us to do like developments of 100% affordable housing, right? So I think outlining how commercial development, while it might not sound what folks want, it really does allow us to make a real difference. You know, yes, the inclusionary housing, the 20%, it's great. You know, it's one of the more aggressive ones out. It might be the highest in Massachusetts last I checked, and although someone might have jumped ahead of us. It's, you know, it makes a real difference, especially you talk about a big development like I got to stop calling it the Bacon Building, but the tall building in Union Square. Apologies to the architect for calling it the Bacon Building. You know, but there are a significant number of affordable units in that building just as a result of the volume that you're talking about. And like you mentioned, Adam, the housing crisis it's regional, some would say national. And I want to be clear, Somerville can't solve that crisis on our own. I do think we have an obligation to do our part by building that new housing. And I like, I like seeing money flowing into the coffers of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. The reality is that federal and state governments have, historically funded a lot of the public housing creation, largely got out of that game decades ago. Those taps mostly turned off. Municipal governments don't have the finances to do these kinds of projects. So we're almost entirely dependent on private developers to do this. So, and that's why having the Affordable Housing Trust Fund with money there to spend on this allows us to go out and do things like 100% affordable housing developments, like, for example, 24 Prospect I wrote a letter in support of that. And I think that those that's what really moves the needle in terms of affordable housing in the city, is large scale affordable housing developments.
No, and I know that you agree. I know that you agree with that, and I know that you see it. I think that it needs to be other people on the city council, I think, could learn from you, and you could push them to get that word out there, because I think that the voters in the city do not see commercial as a way to get more housing. They don't see commercial, they see it as evil. And housing's not just going to pop up on its own. So I think, that just has to be pushed a lot more, where the commercial base is what's the driver for the city. And it has it's every city.
Yeah, we saw that last night when Councilor Scott, made that point and basically held up the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and the linkage fees, as the housing element of a commercial development here. And I agree. That's like it did come up when we had our discussion about raising the linkage fees, and I thank those of you here on the chamber who put together that meeting, with developers, about that. It was informative. I know you probably didn't love our decision to raise the linkage fees, but ultimately, like that's why they're so valuable, is because then it ultimately does help the argument for commercial development in the city, being able to point to those linkage fees and show a real benefit for local housing.
We still love all of you, Councilor. So thank you, Adam. If I may bring up another topic familiar to everybody, I think, on the call, is that the chamber has emphasized the importance of Somerville's attraction through dining and nightlife. There may be some other people that are in the industry or observing the industry might want to comment. The industry seems to be under enormous pressure continuing after COVID, with various city regulations, like in a few days, the city's supposed to announce a new fee for outdoor dining. There has been, there's 99 miles of street behind you on that great map, Councilor, but it's less than 9 miles in the business districts, where it's an economic problem and it's a business problem, and we'd like to have a dialogue. We're also very concerned about the ability of individual restaurants and businesses in that industry to keep going. How do you feel about that? And how do you feel about the council's approach to dining and nightlife?
Yeah, I have friends whose local businesses, entertainment and dining venues, went under during COVID. For me, it's, I am saddened every time I see, a shuttered business. Like, to me, that's someone's hopes and dreams that have been dashed. I hear you about the outdoor dining, the parklet question in terms of setting the fees for that. I supported. They weren't entirely waived. They were dramatically slashed here during the pandemic, just to give businesses a lifeline that they needed. It's a good question. You're talking about private use of public space. You're talking about, revenue lost on the city side from parking meters. It gets tricky because, as you talked about, with the way businesses are anxious about loss of parking, it might be great for the restaurant that has that outdoor dining parklet, but they could be causing anxiety for their neighboring business who sees parking spots go away. One thing that I've pushed for, and I've talked to Chairman Joe Lynch of the on the licensing commission about this, is while they are discounting the cost, deeply discounting the cost of those of the fees for those outdoor dining permits, making sure that coming up with a number that represents the actual, like what we feel it should be, and showing that to people to show what the city is doing in terms of the break that they're giving people. I don't know where things are going here. I know there's the public process going on for setting the new sort of post-pandemic fees for outdoor dining. I hope folks have been participating in that public process. I have not seen, I think there might be one meeting left on that. I'm trying to remember, what is it, September 26th? There might be one more meeting, or maybe they've concluded it. But yeah, I'll be watching to see what comes out of that in terms of recommendations for new fees. I totally agree with the value on, obviously businesses feel the same. We're seeing, even though we're out of the pandemic, we're seeing outdoor dining persist. And it's, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. I think there was a quick comment from Bill Shelton. Bill, did you want to?
Oh, I just put it in chat, but it would eating and drinking establishments could more easily thrive if they had a daytime population to serve,
Right.
Which means more commercial development.
Right.
And to back up on what just to follow up on something Adam said, I'm sorry, I'm going to riff here myself. Adam, if our best affordable housing scheme is inclusionary zoning, then it would take a math moron to not understand that when you increase the numerator to get to 20%, I mean, the denominator goes up too. And to the point where we run out of land before we ever get to 20% affordable housing.
Understood. And we're running out of time. I want to go to Connor Brennan.
Thank you, Steve, for hosting these sessions. Great job. Apologize, I joined the conversation late. Thank you, Councilor Wilson, for participating. I think that the point that I'd like to make is, and it's sort of where I think the Achilles heel, if there is one with the city right now and the administration and the council, is that they're very quick to use data from cities and towns that are not in relationship to us. I would love to be based in Brooklyn and have the population of New York City and the visiting tourists of New York City coming to my city. I would love to be based in Toronto. I would love to be based in Copenhagen, basically be 65% of the population of Denmark using the streets and bikes. But I'm in Somerville, in Teal Square, in Holland Street. And when you take away and you advocate to take away close to 40% of the available parking, it does affect businesses. You can start at Buena Vista lot. And the process that the city has taken on since last September of 2022, we have lost, actively lost, real data for businesses on Holland Street. And however you want to put it down, the data says they're closed, and the only reason they've closed is maybe that they've lost 50% of their parking. So when we talk about displacement, we talk about gentrification. If the parties here on this call close their eyes and think about who are the people that are the home care workers, who are the people that are the nurse practitioners, the dental hygienists, the retail workers, who are the people that are the people behind convenience stores, and counters and servers and bartenders. They tend to be like me. I'm white, but yeah, I'm an immigrant here 35 years who give their whole life to it. They tend to be female. They tend to be single parents. They tend to be in environments where they can't work from home. They can't turn on a computer. They're not fortunate enough to, hop on a bike a mile down the road to their Harvard job or their Boston job. They're working till 1, 2 in the morning. Or they're working at 6 in the morning to stock the shelves in your supermarket. Or come be a home care worker. And when they come home and 50% of their parking is gone, why do you think they're moving out? Who can afford to live in this city? Yeah. So when the city, and you're a big bike advocate, Councilor Wilson, and I'm sure you seem a very educated man. So when the administration and the mobility department put up these studies of where it's working in Toronto and in Brooklyn and Copenhagen and Denmark, and as a small business owner, I say, well, that's great, but can you give me an example where it's working in a city or a square like mine?
Thank you very much, Connor. That was very to the point. We've come up on the hour. I think we could spend the rest of the afternoon, but I'm going to have to bring it to a conclusion. And before I do that, I want to let you know that next week we'll have candidate Will on the series. But before we close out, I want to hand it to Councilor Wilson. That's given us a great hour. And Councilor Wilson, do you have any closing remarks you'd like?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. First, I just want to say to Connor, I hear you, and I acknowledge that process on Holland was rushed. It was suboptimal. I think everyone involved would put their hand up and say that was not the way those processes typically should go. But yeah, I wanted to just speak to that. I didn't feel right just leaving that, without any comment. I'll just say quickly, I know we're here bumping up against our end. I'll just say thanks so much for spending your lunch hour with me and asking those excellent questions. I do have a committee meeting at 6 p.m. October the 4th, but if we get out of there in time, I'm hoping to join you all at Josephine for your after hours event. And so, yeah, I hope to see you all there. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Councilor, and thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon and see you next week.